turn our attention to the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 22, and I want to start with verse 37 and also read verses 38 and 39. Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself." The word of God for the people of God. Let the church say, thanks be to God. This morning for our time, I want to preach on the thought, love is the answer. Love is the answer. And before I go on, let's give God praise for Brother Johnny and the music ministry. Our praise team that has blessed us on this morning. Amen. 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 Again, I want to preach from this thought, love is the answer. Love is the answer. On this past Tuesday, we know it to be in this country, Valentine's Day. And this is oftentimes a day where people express and show love to significant people in their lives. And as I reflected on this past Tuesday, I thought about how love is the theme on Valentine's Day, but it's not necessarily the theme 365 days of the year. And as I came to that realization, I was reminded in 1965, Jackie DeShannon recorded a song written by Hal David entitled, "What the World Needs Now." The chorus of the song says, "What the world needs now is love, sweet love. It's the only thing that there's just too little of. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. No, not just for some, but for everyone." When DeShannon recorded this song back in the 60s, segregation ruled the South. And America was in the midst of fighting in the Vietnam War. These two happenings, as well as some other things, may have triggered Hal David to write this particular song. If these happenings were the primary reason for Hal David to write this song, then it could be presumed that David believed love and not hate. Love and not guns and bombs. But love was the only answer for the world's problems. Since the original recording of What the World Needs Now, the song has been recorded by two other people, with famous entertainer Diana Ross being one of the two. And as I reflected on some of the lyrics to the song, I pondered this question. Why is it almost 50 years after the initial recording of this song, and the lyrics to this song seem even more relevant today than they did when the song was first recorded? Before pondering the answer to the question that I raised, I first must define love. According to dictionary.com, love is defined as an emotional attachment, intense affection or attraction, intimate passion or intercourse. These definitions of love, in my opinion, are a shallow definition of love in comparison to the biblical definition and understanding of love as recorded in Paul's first letter to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, which is affectionately known as the love chapter. In the love chapter, Paul gave a more in-depth description and picture of what love truly is. For Paul said love is patient and kind. Love is not envious, boastful, or proud. Love is also not rude, self-seeking, easily angered, or keeps a record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices in the truth. Love always protects, trusts, hopes, and always preserves. Love never fails. See, when Hal David wrote What the World Needs Now, I believe he might have had a little conversation with God through Paul's letter, and would probably define the sweet love that he was talking about in his song as what Paul penned in the love chapter. Can I tell you, this type of love that is explained in 1 Corinthians chapter 13 is the type of love which keeps families together, marriages from ending up in divorce, children and young people from looking for love in the wrong places. This type of love brings peace in a nation, brings joy to the world, and allows for the church universally to be on one accord. Now back to the question I previously raised. I believe the reason why the song What the World Needs Now is more relevant now than 50 years ago when it was initially recorded is because the love that Paul talked about in the love chapter is not the love that can be found in this world, especially in these divided United States of America, and unfortunately is not found in many households and even in households of faith during these dark and dreary times in which we're currently living in. The Apostle Paul, in one of his letters to his mentee in ministry, Timothy, wrote about the times we are currently living in years ago when these words were recorded in 2 Timothy chapter 3 verses 1 through 5, where Paul said, in the last days perilous times will come, for people will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying its power. For in this free-spirited society in which we now live that Paul wrote about, unfortunately, love has been pushed to the side, while sex, money, and power have been pushed into the forefront. For if the truth be told, sex, which sells, especially in the entertainment industry, money, which many people love in some cases more than they love themselves, plus God, and power, which many people crave but can't handle, are three things which have been the leading factors for the moral and spiritual decay in this world, and also for the spiritual and moral decay, unfortunately, even in the universal church. Sex, what God deemed centuries ago to be sacred, and should only be engaged within the confines of holy matrimony and unadulterated love, has now been reduced and replaced with lust to accompany people's worldly pleasures and sexual desires. The world has changed sex from being sacred into something social, thus making sex to be nothing more than a recreational activity likened to people who consistently post on Facebook, women going shopping, and men playing ball or watching the ball game. I cry out as Hal David, what the world needs now is for love again to be associated and affiliated with sex. By many persons misinterpreting lust for love, sex has lost its sacredness and therefore has produced many hearts being broken, many unwanted children, diseases plus physical deaths, and the deaths of families, communities, and also the community of faith. Money, according to the world, makes the world go round. The philosophy of the world has unfortunately invaded the church, where the doctrine of money and prosperity has replaced the love of Jesus and the cross. Having the money to be able to buy a fancy car or earthly mansion for many is far more important for some than for them to one day have a mansion in the city called heaven, where there'll be no more crying and dying. Folks are so caught up on money that they have twisted what Jesus said. That where Jesus said the love of money is the root of all evil. But some people have remixed what Jesus said and said the lack of money is the root of all evil. When people have no conscience and don't mind twisting God's word for personal gain, I feel how David once again and echo his words. What the world needs now is less money and more love. Oh, power. Everyone wants to be in control. That's all the way from the White House to God's house and even to people's families' houses. But nowadays, even in people's homes, children want more power than the parents. And in some cases, children are having to have the power because they are raising themselves rather than having their parents or guardians raise them. Unfortunately, we live in a world where there are far too many chiefs and not enough Indians. The quest for power by any means necessary is ruining this country. Many families, friendships, and other entities in the world, and it's also ruining the church. The power struggle in so many churches between pastor and people, or people against the people, have caused many churches to either be divided or perish. And it's in the text for today where we come to learn it was the starvation for power and popularity that motivated the Pharisees to get in the way of God's production and program of salvation, which featured Jesus Christ. Before Jesus came on the scene, all eyes were on the Pharisees and another group called the Sadducees. They were the ones that people looked up to. The Pharisees were the ones who were very influential in the synagogues and were a strict group of religious leaders who advocated obedience to the Jewish law and traditions. They were religious-minded people, whereas the Sadducees were the wealthy, upper-class, Jewish priestly party. And they were politically minded people. They rejected the authority of the Tanakh, which was the Jewish Bible consisting of the Old Testament. They rejected anything that went beyond the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and Numbers. The first 5 of the books of the Bible not only are known as the Torah, but also the Pentateuch. See, plus the Sadducees, in addition to rejecting anything past the Torah, they profited from conducting and using the temple as a business. Both groups agreed and disagreed with Jesus' teaching and preaching. The Pharisees agreed with Jesus by showing respect for the law, believing in the resurrection of the dead, and by being obedient to God's will. While they disagreed with Jesus, claiming that he was the Messiah, because they felt that Jesus did not follow all of their traditions and should not have associated himself with the supposed menaces and dregs of society. The Sadducees, on the other hand, showed great respect for the 5 books of Moses, the Torah, the Pentateuch, as did Jesus, while they disagreed with Jesus' teachings on the resurrection of the dead, and also Jesus' stance on not allowing the temple to be used to transact business. The arrival of Jesus caused both groups to be on a mission to try to do Jesus in, because he stepped in their spotlight. He denounced some of their theories, and he trounced on some of their traditions, causing the people who once followed them to begin following Jesus. Do you know this troubled the Pharisees and Sadducees? Because they were the ones everyone looked up to. They were accustomed to receiving all of the glory. They were accustomed to receiving all of the fame. Jesus' presence on earth bothered the Pharisees and Sadducees so much that these two groups, who normally did not associate themselves with one another because of their opposing views and opinions, eventually became allies and began leading a campaign to try to kill their common enemy, Jesus Christ, because of their jealousy. Always understand, child of God, you might want to be ready for people who will try to do you in Because of not something that you've chosen to do, but because of what God chose you to do that might steal some of their spotlight. So always be prepared for the haters and haterettes in this world who can't stand how God wants to use you for his glory and for his honor. Somebody say, expect haters and haterettes. Yeah. See, the allies of the two parties was illustrated in Matthew chapter 16 when both parties demanded for Jesus to show them a sign from heaven in an attempt to try to prove that Jesus was not who he said he was. For they believed God could only do a sign in the sky. But because of their hardened hearts, they didn't realize Jesus came from God's stock because he is the Son of God. So they didn't understand what God can do, Jesus could do. What power God had, Jesus also had, because Jesus is the Son of God, but also is God incarnate and the human embodiment of God on earth. Instead of proving that he had the power to show such a sign, Jesus called them an evil and adulterous generation. And Jesus refused to do as the haters pleased. And he rather gave them an illustration of Jonah, using this illustration as a sign, since they were so concerned with signs, that would predict his death and resurrection, as he initially shared with them in Matthew chapter 12, verses 38 through 42. All throughout the Gospels, you will find various occurrences where the Pharisees and Sadducees sought to question Jesus and put the authority of Jesus on trial. But each time Jesus outsmarted them because he was aware of their intent and motives. In the book of Matthew, especially in chapter 22, you will see several examples of how Jesus was able to outsmart the Pharisees, Sadducees, along with another group called the Herodians, who were followers of King Herod, the same king who tried to kill Jesus when he was a baby. If you study chapter 22, you will see the Pharisees, Herodians, and Sadducees kept trying to stump Jesus, but constantly came up short. The situations happening between Jesus and the various classes of people are akin to when many people who play sports or video games, where if the same person keeps winning, the others keep on trying to play and attempt to be the first person to beat the constant winner so they can have bragging rights. Maybe none of y'all been the champion of anything, but I know what Jesus was going through right there. For when I was in college, I was the John Madden football champion. And people would want me to miss class so they could get another shot at me because I was the champion in John Madden football. Ask anybody who went to Morehouse around the years of 95 through 99. Yeah, in the text, it was about bragging rights to see what class of people would be able to finally defeat and stomp Jesus. In verse 34, you will see the verse says that Jesus silenced the Sadducees. And the previous verses 22 through 33 show how Jesus silenced the Sadducees through explaining in astonishing fashion the reality of the resurrection. Even after Jesus had silenced the Sadducees and previously shot down the Pharisees and Sadducees' attempt to stump them, the Pharisees still relished the opportunity to exercise another attempt to try and shoot Jesus down. This time in their attempt, they called on one of their supposed experts in the law to test Jesus with a question. This expert came to the expert of all experts and asked Jesus this question: Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? For according to scholars, this question was the theological question that was being debated among the religious leaders at the time, and various commandments were being lifted up as the greatest one. And when the supposed expert posed this question to Jesus, I could imagine the Pharisees probably began high-fiving one another, saying to one another, we finally got this Jesus. We finally can expose him for being the fraud that he is. But while they may have been celebrating their premature victory over Jesus, I can imagine Jesus just sitting back, looking at them, saying, look at those fools over there, celebrating a victory that they have not won. Because they don't even understand that they tried to send an expert to question the expert of all experts. They don't even realize I am the way, the truth, and the life. Look at those fools over there. They don't even realize that I am the Alpha and the Omega. They don't even understand that the law was designed to help them be prepared for when I would come into the world. They don't understand I am the one God sent down not to do away with the law, but to strengthen the law. Look at those fools. They simply just don't get it. See, during other times, Jesus, when questioned about who he was and his identity and his ability to do things, he would reprimand them and teach the people by using a parable or an illustration. But this time Jesus didn't have time to play silly games with the people. He was straightforward, and he simply replied using a summary of the entire Decalogue, which is the 10 commandments as recorded in Exodus, and also specifically in Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 5, where Jesus replied to the expert's question by saying this: love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second goes hand in hand with the first, to love your neighbor as you love yourself. Jesus drew that second part from Leviticus chapter 19 verse 18. To sum up everything, Jesus in essence was saying in response to what is the greatest commandment, that love is the answer. When it came down to love, and especially love for God, Jesus didn't have any time playing those silly games with the people, because he knew the topic of love was serious business. And love is needed in order to live the more excellent way.